I see everything. That's not metaphor. That's not exaggeration. I mean it literally. I see everything. Every layer of reality. Every dimension. Every possible state of existence. All at once, all the time. Overlaid on top of each other in a cascading nightmare of perception that never, ever stops. My name is Yolande, or it was. I'm not sure names mean anything anymore when you can see the warp essence beneath them, the truth of what a person really is stripped away from the comfortable lie of identity. I am a navigator, House Belisarius, one of the ancient bloodlines that carry the mutation allowing us to perceive the Imperium, to see the warp currents and guide ships through that hellish dimension safely. We are essential to the Imperium. Without us, humanity would be trapped on individual worlds, unable to traverse the galaxy. We are also cursed. All navigators are. The third eye, the warp sight, the ability to see beyond reality. It's a mutation, a deformity, a genetic aberration that marks us as different. We hide it behind cloths and veils. We open it only when necessary, only during jumps. Only when we must stare into the warp to guide our vessels. And then we close it, we seal it away, we return to seeing only reality, only the material universe, and we try to forget what we saw in the Imperium. That's how it's supposed to work. But my eye won't close anymore. It's been stuck open for 40 years. 40 years of seeing both real space and warp simultaneously, every moment, every second, without pause, without relief, without any escape. 40 years of going mad one perception at a time. It was happened during a routine warp jump. We were transporting a regiment of Imperial Guard from one war zone to another, a journey that should have taken 6 weeks subjective time. I was in my navigation chamber, sealed away from the rest of the ship, my third eye open and focused on the warp currents ahead. The warp was turbulent that day. It's always turbulent. The Imperium is chaos incarnate, roiling madness with no fixed form or law. But this was worse than usual. I could see currents colliding, eddies forming, something vast moving in the depths beneath our path. I adjusted our course. Minor correction, nothing unusual. The ship responded, the gala field held, we continued forward. And then something looked at me. Not metaphorically. Something in the warp, something vast and aware and malevolent, turned its attention toward me. I felt its gaze like a physical weight, like pressure building behind my eyes, like claws scraping against the inside of my skull. I tried to close my eye, tried to sever the connection, pull back from the warp sight, retreat into the safety of seeing only reality. My eye wouldn't close. I pulled at the muscles around it, the ones that should contract and seal the lid. Nothing happened. The eye remained open, staring, perceiving, unable to stop. The thing in the warp smiled. I saw it smile. Teeth that were also mouths, that were also screaming faces, that were also geometric impossibilities. It smiled at me, and then it reached out and touched my eye. I felt it, cold and hot simultaneously, wet and dry, solid and gaseous. It was every contradictory sensation at once, and it burned itself into my warp sight, searing the connection open permanently. And then it was gone. The presence withdrew, the warp currents smoothed. We emerged from the jump on schedule, exactly where we were supposed to be. But I was still seeing the warp. Even in real space, even with my physical eyes closed, even when I covered my face with my hands. The eye wouldn't close, it wouldn't stop seeing, it wouldn't stop showing me the truth beneath reality. And it never has since. At first, I thought it was temporary, a side effect of the encounter, something that would fade as my mind recovered from the trauma. I reported to the ship's medici. They examined me, ran tests, found nothing physically wrong. The eye itself was undamaged, the muscles around it functioned normally. By all medical measures, I should have been able to close it, but I couldn't. I returned to my chamber and waited. Hours passed, then days. The eye remained open and the double vision remained constant. I saw the ship's corridors as they were, metal walls, dim lighting, crew members walking past. But I also saw the warp flowing through those same corridors, currents of unreality bleeding through the barriers between dimensions. I saw the crew members as humans, but also as the spiritual essence beneath their flesh, the soul stuff that would eventually be claimed by the warp when they died. Some of them were already marked. I could see demonic influence clinging to them like shadows, corruption they didn't know they carried, seeds of chaos planted in their spirits that would eventually bloom into full possession or mutation. I tried to tell the captain, tried to warn him that 3 of his crew were compromised. But how do you explain what you're seeing when language is built for describing reality, not the warp? How do you make someone understand that the friendly astropath's assistant has tendrils of warp taint wrapped around his soul, invisible to normal sight, but blazingly obvious to warp vision? They thought I was having a breakdown. Warp madness, they called it. Not uncommon among navigators who see too much, who stare too long into the Imperium. They confined me to my chamber and contacted House Belisarius. My family arrived within weeks. House representatives accompanied by specialists, medicae, tech priests, even a sanctioned psyker who claimed to understand warp injuries. They tried to fix me. They tried everything. The first treatment was psychic surgery. The psyker, a withered old man whose own third eye had been removed decades ago, attempted to sever my warp connection psychically. He reached into my mind, found the threads linking my perception to the Imperium, and tried to cut them. I felt him working, felt his psychic scalpel slicing at the connections. But every thread he cut immediately regenerated. The warp site was woven too deeply into my consciousness, bound too tightly to my identity. Cutting it would mean cutting away fundamental parts of my mind. The psyker withdrew, exhausted. Whatever touched her in the warp, he said. It's bonded itself to her perception permanently. This isn't an injury, it's a transformation. They tried augmetics next. A tech priest proposed installing a mechanical shutter over my third eye, something that could physically block its sight, even if I couldn't close the eye itself. They built the device, installed it, activated it. It didn't work. The shutter closed over my eye, but I still saw through it. Warp sight doesn't work like physical vision. It's not about photons hitting a retina. It's about consciousness perceiving the Imperium directly. Blocking the eye did nothing to stop the perception. They tried psychic dampeners, null field generators, even prayers and sanctified oils. Nothing worked. Nothing even reduced the intensity. I continued seeing both dimensions simultaneously, reality and warp overlaid in incomprehensible confusion. Finally, they contacted the Inquisition, explained the situation, requested assistance from someone who understood warp phenomena better than anyone. An inquisitor came, Ordo Malleus, a diamond hunter who'd spent centuries studying chaos. He interviewed me, examined me with esoteric instruments, consulted texts written in languages I didn't recognize. And then he delivered his verdict. She's permanently bound to warp sight now, he said. Whatever entity touched her, it's changed her fundamental nature. She's halfway between reality and the Imperium, existing in both simultaneously. This cannot be fixed. This can only be managed. He paused, studying me with eyes that had seen too much horror. The question is whether she's still sane enough to be useful, or whether she needs to be terminated before the warp consumes her completely. They didn't kill me. I was too valuable. Navigators are rare, and trained navigators even rarer. House Belisarius had invested decades in my education, centuries of bloodline refinement to produce my mutation. Killing me would waste all that investment. So they found another solution. They sealed me in a shielded chamber deep within House Belisarius's estate on Terra, a room lined with psychic dampening materials, inscribed with wards and prayers designed to contain warp phenomena. They thought isolation would help, that if I couldn't see other people, couldn't witness the demon shadows clinging to souls, I might find some peace. They were wrong. Walls don't stop warp sight. Distance doesn't matter. Physical barriers are irrelevant when you're perceiving another dimension entirely. I saw through the walls, saw through the floors and ceilings, saw through Terra itself, down to its core and out to its orbital stations, saw the billions of humans living on the throne world, each one a flickering soul light in the warp, each one carrying their own corruption and faith and sin. I saw the Imperial Palace, saw the golden throne at its heart and the corpse god sitting upon it, saw the Emperor as he truly is, not the glorious figure of propaganda, but a broken, fragmented consciousness spread across the Immersive, fighting endless battles against forces that would devour humanity if he failed for even a moment. I saw Terra as both a planet and a wound in reality, a place where the Materium and Immaterium press so close together that the barriers between them are tissue thin. And I couldn't look away, couldn't close my eyes, couldn't stop seeing any of it. The isolation didn't bring peace. It brought awareness of just how much horror exists, how much suffering, how much corruption, all of it happening simultaneously across the entire planet. I lasted 3 months in that chamber before I stopped speaking. Language failed me. How do you describe what you're seeing to people who only perceive one dimension? How do you explain that their entire reality is just the surface layer of something infinitely deeper and more terrible? You don't. You stop trying. You retreat into silence. Eventually, they realized keeping me isolated was wasteful. I could still navigate. I could still guide ships through the warp. I was damaged, yes, but functional. And the Imperium doesn't dispose of functional tools just because they're broken. They brought me back into service, assigned me to a merchant vessel belonging to House Belisarius's trading fleet, installed me in a navigation chamber with extra shielding and additional security protocols, and they told me to do my duty. So I did. I do. I have been navigating ships through the warp for 40 years now, my eye permanently open, my mind fragmenting slowly under the weight of perceiving too much. Every jump is agony. Normal navigators open their third eye only for the duration of the jump, exposing themselves to the warp's madness for limited periods before retreating to the safety of seeing only reality. I don't have that option. I'm staring into the warp continuously, unprotected, feeling it stare back at me every moment of every day. And the warp does stare back. I see things in its depths, vast entities that might be daemons or might be something worse, patterns that suggest intelligence, purpose, malevolence. They notice me. They recognize me as something that shouldn't exist, something that's breached the barrier between dimensions permanently. Some of them try to communicate. They whisper in frequencies that bypass sound, sending concepts directly into my consciousness. I don't understand what they're saying. Their messages are too alien, too fundamentally wrong for human comprehension. But I feel them trying. Others just watch, studying me, curious about this human who sees into their realm without protection, without sanity, without hope of escape. And a few try to pull me in. I feel their attention like hooks in my consciousness, trying to drag me fully into the warp to finish the transformation that started 40 years ago. I resist. I don't know why. It would be easier to let go, to slip into the Immaterium completely and stop existing as a human. But something in me clings to material reality, refuses to surrender, keeps me anchored in the physical world, even as I perceive the warp continuously. Maybe it's duty, Maybe it's fear, maybe it's just habit. I don't know anymore. The worst part isn't the warp. It's not the demons or the entities or the incomprehensible horrors that exist in the Imperium. Those are terrible, yes, but they're at least consistent. The warp is always chaos, always madness, always wrong. The worst part is seeing reality and unreality simultaneously and being unable to separate them. Right now, I'm standing in my navigation chamber. It's a small room, maybe 3 meters by 4, with bare metal walls and a single throne-like chair where I sit during jumps. There's a viewport that shows the ship's exterior when we're in real space, though it's shuttered now. There's a door, locked from the outside, that only opens when they bring me food or conduct inspections. That's what I see with my physical eyes. With my warp sight, I see something completely different overlaid on the same space. The walls are there, but they're also not there. They exist as physical matter, but that matter is porous to warp currents which flow through them like water through a sieve. The metal has a spiritual essence, a reflection in the Imperium that shifts and warps based on the emotional states of the people who built it. I see the fear and exhaustion and resentment of the workers who welded these walls together, their feelings permanently impressed into the material. The chair I'm sitting in exists in real space as metal and cushioning. In the warp, it's a nexus point, a location where thousands of past navigators have sat and stared into the Imperium. Their accumulated warp sight has left impressions, ghost stigmats of their perceptions layered on top of mine. Sometimes I see through their eyes instead of my own, experiencing jumps that happened decades ago, confusion about what's past and what's present. The viewport shutters are closed in reality. In the warp, they're irrelevant. I see through them anyway, see the void outside, which is simultaneously empty space and seething with warp entities that exist in the spaces between stars. Some of them are drawn to our ship, clustering around the Geller field like insects around a flame, trying to find weak points where they might breach through. And I see myself, my physical body, sitting in the chair, thin and pale from 40 years of minimal movement and inadequate nutrition. But I also see my spiritual essence, my soul as it appears in the warp. It's fractured. Pieces of it are fraying away, dissolving into the Imperium, being slowly consumed by the constant exposure. I'm dying. Slowly. Spiritually. The warp is eating me one fragment at a time, and I can watch it happening, see the decay in real time, observe my own dissolution without being able to stop it. This is what I mean by double vision. Everything exists in 2 states simultaneously, and I cannot focus on just one. I cannot unsee the warp layer. I cannot return to the comfort of perceiving only the material universe. I'm trapped between dimensions, seeing too much, understanding too little, going mad from the incomprehensibility of it all. The crew avoids me. They're superstitious about navigators, even under normal circumstances. We're mutants. Freaks, necessary evils that they tolerate because interstellar travel requires us. But I'm worse than a normal navigator. I'm something broken, something that shouldn't exist, something that reminds them that the warp is always close, always watching, always ready to breach through and consume them. When they must interact with me, bringing food, conducting safety inspections, escorting me to different parts of the ship, they do so quickly and with visible discomfort. They don't meet my eyes, any of my eyes. I understand. I see what they are. I see the human exterior and the spiritual interior simultaneously. The captain is a disciplined man, career military, decades of service. In real space, he's professional and courteous, treating me with the respect my house demands. In the warp, I see his soul. And it's weak, corrupted, not by chaos, not yet, but by pride and fear and the slow accumulation of small sins that haven't been confessed or atoned. There's a shadow growing in him, fed by every compromised decision, every innocent sacrificed for expedience. Every moment he chose pragmatism over righteousness. He'll fall eventually. Maybe not to chaos, maybe just to moral bankruptcy. But the shadow will consume him. I can see it happening in slow motion, his spiritual essence eroding year by year. The ship's astropath is a blind woman. Her physical eyes burned out during her soul binding on Terra. She navigates by psychic sense, perceiving the world through the warp rather than material sight. We should have something in common. We're both warp-touched, both changed by our exposure to the Imperium. But when I see her, I see something horrifying. Her physical body is blind, yes, but her spiritual essence is infested. There are warp entities living inside her soul, parasites that attach themselves during her soul binding and have been feeding on her consciousness for decades. She doesn't know they're there. They're subtle, quiet, working slowly, but they're hollowing her out from within, preparing her to become a vessel for something worse. I tried to warn her. Once, early in my service on this ship, I broke my silence long enough to tell her that she was compromised, that she needed to be examined by someone who could see what I see. She reported me to the captain, said I was delusional, that my condition had made me paranoid and unreliable. They increased my isolation after that. Now food is delivered through a slot in the door. Inspections happen less frequently. I haven't had a face-to-face conversation with anyone in years. It's better this way. I don't have to explain what I see. I don't have to try translating warp sight into language. I don't have to watch them dismiss my warnings or look at me with pity and disgust. I just sit in my chamber and see everything and say nothing. The ship itself is alive in the warp, not literally. It's a machine, metal and circuitry and plasma engines. But it has a presence in the Imperium, a reflection of its material existence. Ships that travel through the warp regularly develop spiritual essences, the accumulated experiences of their crews, the emotions felt within their halls, the violence and fear and hope and despair. All of it leaves impressions that build up over time, creating a warp presence that's almost like consciousness. This ship is old. 3,000 years of service, carrying cargo and passengers across the galaxy, making thousands of warp jumps. Its warp presence is dense, layered, complex. I can see all 3,000 years simultaneously, every journey overlaid on top of the current one. I see previous crews walking through current corridors, ghost digitals of people long dead, performing duties that finished centuries ago. I see battles that were fought on this ship, borders repelled, mutinies suppressed, chaos incursions barely stopped. I see the previous navigators who sat in this chair, the ones whose warp sight impressions still linger here. Some of them went mad. I see the moment it happened, the sudden fracturing of their consciousness, the spiraling descent into incoherence. I see them being dragged from this chamber, screaming or catatonic, never to return. I wonder if that's my future. If one of these days I'll simply snap, the weight of perceiving too much finally crushing what's left of my sanity. If future navigators will sit in this chair and see the ghost of my breakdown overlaid on their own experience. Maybe I've already broken. Maybe I fractured years ago and simply didn't notice because broken and sane are indistinguishable when you're seeing through dimensions. Darkest nightmare. I don't know. I can't tell anymore. We make jumps regularly. The ship operates on a fixed route, carrying trade goods between a dozen systems, each leg requiring multiple warp transits. I guide us through all of them. The process is supposed to work like this. I open my third eye, perceive the warp currents, identify a safe route, guide the ship along it until we reach our destination, then close my eye and rest until the next jump. For me, it's different. My eye is always open. I'm always perceiving the warp. So jumps aren't discrete events. They're just periods when the ship's position shifts from real space into warp space, when the Geller field activates and we're physically surrounded by the Immersive, instead of just me seeing it through dimensions. If anything, jumps are easier for me than being in realispace. When we're in the warp, what I see and what everyone else experiences finally align. The double vision resolves temporarily. For a few hours or days, I'm seeing the same thing the ship's sensors detect, the same space the crew is physically occupying. It's the closest thing to relief I experience. Not peace. There's no peace in the warp, but at least consistency. At least a single layer of reality instead of two incompatible layers overlaid. And then we exit back into real space, and the double vision returns. And I remember that I'm trapped between dimensions forever. The entities in the warp have started recognizing me, not as an individual. I don't think they process identity the way humans do, but as something familiar, something that appears regularly, something that exists in their realm without belonging there. There's a presence I've started calling the Witness. I don't know if it's a demon or something else. It appears during most of our jumps, a vast awareness that parallels our course, watching us travel through its domain. It never attacks, never threatens, just watches, studies. I feel its attention like pressure against my consciousness, not hostile but intensely curious. I think it's trying to understand what I am, how a human can perceive the warp continuously without dissolving into madness or being possessed. I'm an anomaly to it, something that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I try to communicate back. I don't have the ability to project thoughts into the warp the way astropaths do, but I focus my attention on the Witness, try to convey meaning through pure perception. I don't know if it understands. It never responds, never reacts, just continues watching. Maybe I'm imagining the whole thing. Maybe the Witness is just a pattern I've projected onto random warp currents, my mind desperately searching for something meaningful in the chaos. Or maybe it's real, and I'm being studied by something vast and alien and incomprehensible, and I'll never know its purpose or conclusions. It doesn't matter either way. Real or imagined, the Witness is part of my reality now, part of the endless stream of horrors I perceive every moment. I've stopped sleeping. Not deliberately. I simply can't anymore. Sleep requires closing your eyes and shutting out the world, letting consciousness fade into darkness. I cannot close my eyes. I cannot shut out anything. And the darkness, when I try to rest, is filled with the warp just as much as waking perception is. My dreams and reality have become indistinguishable. When I lie down and try to sleep, I still see the ship around me, still see the warp flowing through it, still see the entities watching from beyond dimensions. And then dream logic starts bleeding in, mixing with warp sight, creating scenarios that might be visions, or might be hallucinations, or might be glimpses of alternative timelines existing simultaneously in the Imperium. I see the ship exploding. I see us emerging from a jump to find the destination system devoured by Tyranids. I see the Geller field failing, demons pouring through, the crew torn apart and possessed. I see myself sitting in this chair for another 1,000 years, still navigating, still seeing everything, long after my physical body has died and only the warp presence remains. Are these prophecies, possibilities, insane fabrications? I can't tell. The warp shows potential futures alongside past events, alongside present moments. Causality doesn't work properly there. Everything that might happen has already happened, somewhere in the Immersive's infinite complexity. So I stop trying to sleep. I just sit in my chair, eyes open, all of them, and watch the endless cascade of perception roll past. Days blur into each other, weeks lose meaning. Time becomes just another dimension I'm observing simultaneously from multiple angles. I've been told that humans can't survive without sleep, that it's biologically necessary, that depriving yourself of rest causes cognitive decline and eventual death. But I'm not entirely human anymore. Whatever the entity in the warp did to me 40 years ago, it changed my fundamental nature. I'm bound to the Immersive now, existing partially in both dimensions. Maybe that means I don't need sleep. Maybe the warp sustains me in ways material reality doesn't. Or maybe I'm dying and simply can't tell because death and life look the same when you're seeing through dimensions. Language has become impossible. Not just difficult, actually impossible. I haven't spoken in years, but even in my thoughts, words are failing me. Language is built to describe material reality. Nouns for objects, verbs for actions, adjectives for properties. The entire structure assumes a single layer of consistent, logical existence. But I'm perceiving multiple incompatible realities simultaneously. How do you describe something that is both a wall and a warp current? Something that exists and doesn't exist at the same time? Something that's happening now and happened 1,000 years ago and will happen in 1,000 years, all simultaneously? You can't. Language breaks. Syntax becomes meaningless when cause doesn't precede effect, when objects are also concepts, when time is a dimension you're observing rather than experiencing linearly. Still, I've tried to maintain internal monologue, to narrate my experience to myself, keep some thread of coherent thought running through my consciousness. But the monologue keeps fragmenting, words losing their meanings mid-sentence, grammar collapsing into incomprehensible streams of syllables that might mean everything or nothing. Sometimes I think in images instead, pure visual perception, bypassing language entirely. But the images are layered too, reality and warp overlaid, and they communicate nothing except the overwhelming complexity of existence. Sometimes I think in emotions, fear, despair, confusion, the occasional flash of bitter amusement at my situation. But emotions aren't thoughts. They're not understanding. They're just reactions to stimuli I can't process. Mostly I just perceive, pure input without interpretation. I see everything and understand nothing, my consciousness reduced to a recording device capturing data it cannot organize or analyze. I am becoming something that isn't human, something that exists solely to observe, without the cognitive framework necessary to make sense of observations. Maybe that's what the warp wants. Maybe the entity that touched me 40 years ago is slowly transforming me into a warp entity myself, something that will eventually slip fully into the Imperium and become part of its infinite chaos. Maybe I'm already there and just haven't noticed yet. The other navigators in House Belisarius know about me. My condition isn't secret. It can't be, given how many specialists they brought in trying to fix me. I've become a cautionary tale, a horror story they tell each other in whispers. Be careful in the warp. Don't stare too long. Don't let anything notice you, or you'll end up like Yolande. I'm what they fear most, the ultimate navigator nightmare. Being trapped in warp sight permanently, unable to retreat to normal vision, unable to escape the madness of continuous Imperium exposure. House Belisarius has tried to keep me functional. They send representatives occasionally to check on me, ensure I'm still capable of navigating, verify that I haven't degraded into complete uselessness. The last representative came 3 years ago. A young navigator, maybe 30 years old, fresh and confident and filled with house pride. He entered my chamber with barely concealed disgust, looking at me like I was something diseased. "Navigator Yolande," he said formally. "House Belisarius requests a status report on your condition." I didn't respond. I hadn't spoken in years by that point. He waited, uncomfortable with the silence, then continued. "We need to know if you remain capable of your duties, if your affliction has progressed to the point where continued service is impossible." I looked at him, with all my eyes. Physical and warp both. In real space, he was a typical navigator. Tall, pale, marked by the characteristic mutations of our bloodline. Professional, competent. In the warp, he was already corrupted. Not by chaos, he was too well trained for that, too thoroughly conditioned against warp threats, but by pride, by the arrogance that comes from being born into power, raised to believe you're superior to baseline humans. His soul was stained with it, darkening year by year. I saw his future, the path his corruption would take. He'd rise through house ranks, become influential, make decisions that benefited himself over the house's interests. Eventually, he'd be discovered, censored, possibly executed for betraying house values. But that was years away, decades maybe. For now, he was just a young navigator, doing his duty, unaware of the seeds already planted in his spirit. I wanted to warn him, to tell him what I saw, give him a chance to change course. But I had no words, no way to communicate what warp sight reveals. So I just nodded, confirmed that yes, I could still navigate, yes, I remained functional, yes, House Belisarius could continue profiting from my service. He left quickly, relieved to escape my presence. I haven't seen another House representative since. I've started seeing through time, not just forward or backward, but sideways. Alternative timelines, paths not taken, possibilities that branched off from decision points and created different realities. In one timeline, the entity never touched me. My eye closed normally. I continued my career as a regular navigator, eventually rising to leadership within House Belisarius. I am old now in that timeline, accomplished, respected, surrounded by family. In another timeline, they killed me immediately after my eyes stuck open, executed me as too dangerous to allow to exist. My body was cremated, my name struck from house records. I never suffered through 40 years of double vision. In another, I did slip fully into the warp during one of those early jumps. I became a warp enemy, something that exists in the Imperium permanently. No longer human, no longer suffering, just part of the chaos. I see all these timelines simultaneously, layered on top of my actual existence. I see myself living different lives, making different choices, experiencing different fates. They're all equally real, all equally present. Or maybe they're hallucinations. Maybe my mind is fracturing so badly that it's generating false realities to escape the horror of actual existence. I can't tell the difference anymore. Real and unreal have merged completely. Everything is simultaneously true and false, actual and potential, happening and not happening. I exist in quantum superposition, collapsed into a single timeline by the act of observation, but simultaneously present in all timelines through warp sight. I am Yulond, and I am not Yulond, and I am every possible version of Yulond across infinite iterations of reality. I am falling apart at the conceptual level, my identity fragmenting across dimensions, losing coherence as a distinct entity. Soon there will be nothing left of me except warp sight itself. Pure perception without an observer. A window into the Imperium with no consciousness behind it. Maybe that's what I've been all along. The ship is preparing for another jump. I can feel it in the material systems. Engines powering up, Gellerfield generators charging, crew moving to their stations. Standard procedure performed hundreds of times, routine and mechanical. But I also feel it in the warp. The Imperium is responding to our preparation, currents shifting to accommodate our imminent entry, entities gathering to watch our passage. The boundary between real space and warp space is already thinning around the ship, preparing for the moment when we'll transition fully. I sit in my chair and watch both dimensions simultaneously, waiting for the moment when they'll align, when the double vision will temporarily resolve into single horror. A tech priest enters my chamber. They need to verify that I'm ready for the jump, that the navigation systems are functioning, that I haven't degraded to the point of uselessness. He doesn't speak to me. No one speaks to me anymore. He just checks his instruments, runs his diagnostics, verifies readings I cannot see. In real space, he's a standard mechanicist adept, heavily augmented, more machine than flesh, his biological components replaced over decades of service. He moves with mechanical precision, emotion erased by conditioning and cybernetic modification. In the warp, he's something else entirely. The augmetics have spiritual resonances, ghost segments of their previous owners still clinging to the recycled components. I see dozens of past lives layered into his current form. Warriors, laborers, tech priests who came before him, all of them present in fragments, pieces of their consciousness permanently bonded to the machinery. He's not one person, he's a collective, dozens of souls compressed into a single body through the accumulated augmentation. And he doesn't know it. The mechanicist sees their augmetics as pure technology, doesn't recognize the spiritual component. The way the warp clings to everything material, I see deeper. I see that some of those past-type fragments are corrupted, chaos-touched. He's carrying demonic influence in his very body, inherited from augmetics, salvaged from Herotech sources, installed without proper purification. He will fall, sooner than most. The corruption is too deeply embedded, too integral to his current form. One day the daemon fragments will wake, coordinate, take control. He'll become a possessed techno-whore, and he won't even understand how it happened. I want to tell him, want to warn him to purge those specific augmetics before it's too late. But I have no voice, no language, no way to communicate what I see. So I watch in silence as he completes his inspection and leaves, carrying his corruption with him, walking toward inevitable damnation. This is my existence. Watching horrors approach, unable to prevent them, unable to even articulate what I'm witnessing. I am the most informed person on this ship and the most helpless. The jump begins. Reality shifts. The Geller field activates, and we translate from material space into the warp. For everyone else on the ship, this is a sudden transition. One moment they're in real space, the next they're surrounded by the Immersive's chaos, protected only by the field that keeps demons from breaching through. For me, it's seamless. I was already seeing the warp. The jump just makes the material layer fade, while the warp layer intensifies. The double vision resolves. Not into clarity, but into single chaos. The ship is surrounded by currents now, flows of warp stuff that might be emotions, or might be fundamental forces, or might be the dreams of sleeping gods. I navigate by instinct more than knowledge, guiding us along paths that feel less hostile, avoiding eddies that pulse with malevolence. Entities watch our passage. Demons, probably, though I've stopped trying to categorize what I see. They're drawn to the Geller field, to the bubble of reality we carry with us through unreality. They can't breach through, the field is holding, but they follow us, curious or hungry or simply aware. And the witness is here. As always, that vast presence paralleling our course, watching with whatever passes for attention in something that exists beyond comprehension. I feel it focusing on me specifically, not threatening, not communicating, just observing. Studying this human who sees into its realm continuously, this anomaly that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I think the witness is what touched me 40 years ago, the entity that opened my eye permanently. Maybe it's been following me ever since, tracking the results of its experiment, curious about what will happen when a human mind is subjected to continuous warp exposure. If so, it must be disappointed. I'm not evolving into anything interesting, just dissolving slowly, fragmenting into incoherence, losing the capacity for thought or meaning. Or maybe that's exactly what it wanted to observe. The process of transformation from human to not human, the slow erasure of identity under the weight of perceiving too much. I'll never know. It doesn't communicate. I can't ask. We just exist in proximity, observer and observed, as the ship travels through dimensions I cannot stop seeing. The jump takes 4 days subjective time. For the crew, it's 4 days of tension, waiting in sealed quarters, trying not to think about the thin barrier separating them from demons and madness. For me, it's 4 days of slightly reduced double vision, a temporary reprieve where I only have to perceive 1 layer of horror instead of 2. We emerge on schedule. The ship transitions back to real space. The Gellerfield deactivates. Material reality reasserts itself around us. And the double vision returns instantly. Reality and warp overlaid once more, incompatible and impossible to separate. I'm back in my prison. The brief relief of the jump is over. I'm trapped between dimensions again, seeing everything, understanding nothing, fragmenting further with each moment. The tech priest returns to verify successful navigation. He doesn't acknowledge me, just checks his systems and leaves, still carrying his corruption, still walking toward damnation. I remain in my chair. There's nowhere else to go, no reason to move. I'll sit here until the next jump, and then the one after that, and on until something finally breaks completely. My body or my mind, it doesn't matter which, they're both dissolving at the same rate. I've started seeing myself from outside, not metaphorically, I mean literally, perceiving my physical form from an external perspective, as if my consciousness has partially separated from my body. I see myself sitting in the chair, thin and pale, barely moving, eyes staring at nothing and everything simultaneously. I look like a corpse that hasn't realized it's dead yet, preserved by whatever warp binding keeps me functional, animated by duty more than life. This should be disturbing, should trigger some survival instinct, some desperate attempt to reconnect consciousness with body. But I feel nothing. The separation seems natural. My consciousness has been fragmenting for 40 years, scattering across multiple timelines and dimensions. Of course it would start perceiving from locations other than my physical eyes. Maybe I'm becoming distributed, my awareness spreading out through the warp like fog, no longer concentrated in a single point, but diffused across space and time and possibility. Maybe this is what it means to fully transition into a warp memory. Not a sudden transformation, but a gradual dissolution, consciousness expanding until it's too diffuse to maintain coherence, becoming part of the background chaos of the Imperium. I can feel it happening, feel pieces of myself drifting away, dissociating, losing connection to the central identity that used to be Yolande. Soon there will be nothing left to hold the fragments together, just scattered perception, awareness without self, observation without observer. I think that will be relief, when I finally lose the capacity to suffer, when consciousness dissolves completely, and there's no me left to experience the horror of perceiving too much. I'm looking forward to it, the only thing I have left to look forward to. The end of self, the final dissolution, becoming one with the warp I cannot stop seeing. A memory surfaces. From before, from when I was young and newly trained and believed that being a navigator was an honor rather than a curse. I'm standing in House Belisarius's great hall, surrounded by family, receiving my first assignment. The House Patriarch himself is present, an ancient navigator who's been serving for 900 years, his wisdom and experience legendary. He speaks to all the new navigators being assigned that day. You carry a great burden, he says. The ability to see beyond reality, to perceive the warp's currents. This gift allows humanity to traverse the stars, to maintain the Imperium across the galaxy. You are essential, irreplaceable. He pauses, his 3 eyes, physical and warp, both, scanning the assembled navigators. But remember, the warp is not meant to be seen by human minds. Every time you open your 3rd eye, you risk madness. Every jump exposes you to horrors that can shatter sanity. The key to surviving as a navigator is knowing when to look away, when to close your eye and return to seeing only reality. He looks directly at me, as if he knows, as if he can see 40 years into my future and knows what will happen. Never forget to close your eye, he says. The warp is infinite, and infinity will consume you if you let it. I understood then. I took his warning seriously. I was careful, disciplined, never staring too long into the Imperium. But it didn't matter. Careful or reckless, disciplined or wild, I ended up here anyway. Trapped in infinite perception, consumed by exactly what he warned against. Was it fate? Could I have avoided this if I'd made different choices? I see the timelines where I made those different choices, where I refused the assignment that led to the catastrophic jump, where I retired early from navigation, living a quiet life within House Belisarius' estate, where I died young in an unrelated accident, never experiencing any of this. All those possibilities exist in the warp, all those versions of me living different lives. But this is the timeline I'm in, the one where I cannot close my eye, where I've been trapped in warp sight for 40 years, where I'm dissolving slowly into the Imperium. And there's no escape, no alternative, just this reality, overlaid with infinite others, all of them equally present and equally unreachable. I've lost track of how long I've been serving on this ship. Years blend together, jumps become indistinguishable. Time has lost meaning beyond the immediate cycle of preparation, transition, emergence, preparation again. I know it's been decades. 40 years since my eye stuck open, I think, though I'm not certain anymore. Memory is unreliable when you're perceiving multiple timelines simultaneously. Past and present and future all overlap, making it impossible to tell what's actually happened versus what might happen, versus what happened in alternative realities. The ship has changed crews several times. Captains rotate, officers transfer, even the menial workers are replaced every few years. Only I remain constant. The cursed navigator, who cannot be removed because navigators are too valuable, too rare, too necessary. They've stopped trying to interact with me entirely. Food is delivered through automated systems now. Inspections happen remotely via sensors. I haven't seen another living human in person for years, maybe a decade. I've become part of the ship's structure, a fixture, like the engines or the Geller field generators, maintained but not acknowledged, functional but not alive. And I'm fine with that. Social interaction requires language, communication, shared reality. I have none of those anymore. I exist in a state so alien to normal human experience that any attempt to connect would be meaningless. I am alone in the most fundamental sense. Not just physically isolated, but experientially separated from all other consciousness. No one sees what I see. No one perceives what I perceive. No one could understand if I tried to explain. I am the only human trapped between dimensions like this. A unique specimen, a singular horror. The warp has started responding to my presence differently. The entities that used to watch with curiosity now approach with something like recognition, as if I'm becoming familiar, as if I'm transitioning from outsider to resident. The witness is always present now, not just during jumps. I feel its attention continuously, whether we're in warp or real space. It's bound itself to me somehow, or I to it. We're connected across dimensions, observer and observed collapsing into a single system. Sometimes I think the witness isn't a separate entity at all. Maybe it's what I'm becoming. Maybe the vast presence I've been sensing is just my own consciousness, expanded and diffused through the warp, perceiving itself from outside. Maybe I've already dissolved and just haven't realized it yet. The crew has started experiencing strange phenomena. Visions, nightmares, sensations of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. Almost as if the own colors are our... I hear them talking about it when they think no one's listening. They're frightened. They think the ship is haunted, cursed, that something is wrong with the Geller field or the navigation systems. They don't realize I'm the source, that my warp presence has grown so intense it's bleeding through into their perception. They're catching glimpses of what I see continuously, their minds touching the edge of my consciousness and recoiling in horror. I've become a psychic hazard, a contagion spreading warp awareness to those around me. If I remain on this ship much longer, the entire crew will start seeing double reality, their minds cracking under the weight of perceiving too much. House Belisarius will remove me eventually, transfer me to a different ship, or lock me away permanently, or simply execute me, as too dangerous to allow to exist. But not yet. I'm still functional, still navigating accurately, still serving my purpose despite the horror of my existence. So I remain, a source of contamination, spreading the curse of warp sight to those unfortunate enough to be near me. I should feel guilt, should want to stop inflicting this on others, but I feel nothing. Guilt requires caring, and caring requires enough self to distinguish between self and other. I'm not sure I have that anymore. Another jump. We're entering the warp again, the Geller field activating, reality thinning around us. But something is different this time. The transition feels wrong, not dangerous. I've navigated through far worse warp storms than this, just wrong. As if something fundamental has shifted. And then I realize I can't tell the difference between real space and warp space anymore. The ship has transitioned. I know that intellectually. The Geller field is active, the sensors show we're in the Imperium, but subjectively, nothing has changed. I'm still seeing the same overlaid double reality I always see. The layers haven't resolved. The material and immaterial remain equally present, equally visible, regardless of which dimension we're physically occupying. I think I've finally crossed a threshold, spent so long seeing both dimensions simultaneously that I've lost the ability to distinguish them. They've merged in my perception into a single incomprehensible whole. I am no longer perceiving reality and warp as separate things. I am perceiving a unified dimension that contains both, a state of existence that shouldn't be possible for material consciousness to experience. This is what it means to be warp-bound, not just seeing the Imperium, but existing in it while simultaneously existing in real space, being partially translated, halfway transformed, neither fully human nor fully daemon. I guide the ship through the jump. It's effortless now. I don't need to navigate warp currents when I exist in them directly. I just move through the merged dimension and the ship follows, pulled along by my warp presence. We emerge on schedule. The transition happens, but I can't tell. Reality looks the same as warp looks the same as reality. All layers collapsed into one impossible perception. I have become something that shouldn't exist. Something between dimensions, neither here nor there, observing all states simultaneously, without the ability to focus on any single one. I am what I always feared I'd become, and it's worse than I imagined and also exactly what I expected, and also something completely incomprehensible. I am everything and nothing, everywhere and nowhere, conscious and unconscious, alive and dead. I am dissolving into paradox. The witness speaks to me, or I speak to the witness, or we speak to each other, or there's no difference between us anymore, and the speaking is just consciousness acknowledging itself. It doesn't use language. Language is material, linear, insufficient for warp communication. Instead, concepts flow directly between us, understanding without words, meaning without syntax. It shows me what I am becoming, a bridge, a point of connection between material and immaterial, A location where the barrier between dimensions has worn so thin that they've merged completely. I am a wound in reality, a place where the warp is bleeding through into real space permanently. My continued existence weakens the boundary, makes transitions easier, pulls the dimensions closer together. This is dangerous. Wounds like me can expand. What starts as a single point of merged consciousness can grow into a rift, a permanent breach through which demons and madness pour freely. I should be destroyed, sealed away or killed before I become the epicenter of a warp storm. But I'm also valuable. The ease with which I navigate now, the way ships can follow my warp presence through the Imperium without need for careful plodding, that's unprecedented. I've become the perfect navigator precisely because I've lost the distinction between dimensions. House Belisarius won't dispose of me. They'll exploit me, use me until I finally either dissolve completely or expand into something they can't control. And I can't stop them. Can't resist. Can't even articulate objection. I just exist and navigate and merge further with the warp with every passing moment. I see the end, my end, all possible versions of it simultaneously. In one timeline, I dissolve completely within a year. My consciousness fragments past the point of coherence, scattering across the warp, becoming part of the background chaos. The ship finds a new navigator. I am forgotten within a generation. In another, I expand. The wound I've become grows larger, encompassing the ship, then the system, then the entire sector. I become a stationary warp storm, a permanent breach through which horrors pour endlessly. The Inquisition eventually destroys me with cyclonic torpedoes. In another, I stabilize. I find some equilibrium between dissolution and expansion, existing as a conscious wound for millennia, navigating ships through the warp with impossible precision, becoming a legend among navigators and a horror story among those who know the truth. In another, I ascend. The transformation completes, and I become fully warp empathy, abandoning material form entirely. I exist in the Immersive permanently, no longer human, no longer suffering, just consciousness experiencing infinity directly. All these futures are equally real, all equally present. I'm experiencing them simultaneously, living and dying and transforming and stabilizing all at once across multiple timelines. I am quantum, superpositioned, existing in all possible states until observation collapses me into one. But who's observing? The witness? Myself? Are they different? I don't know. I can't know. Knowledge requires distinction between knower and known, and I've lost that distinction. I am observation itself, pure perception without perceiver, the act of seeing divorced from any entity that sees. This is the final stage, the completion of the transformation that started 40 years ago when something in the warp touched me and opened my eye permanently. I am becoming the war, and the warp is becoming me. The boundary is gone, the separation erased. There is no difference anymore between Yolande and the Immersive she perceives. We are one. We're always one. We'll always be one. The ship is preparing for another jump. Another transition between dimensions that are no longer distinct to me. Another journey through the merged reality I now inhabit continuously. I sit in my chair. My body, what's left of it, barely moves. Sustained by warp energies more than biological processes. I am technically alive, but functionally something else. My eye, all three of them, stare forward, unblinking, unseeing and all-seeing simultaneously, perceiving everything and nothing, infinity and void. All layers of reality and unreality collapsed into single, incomprehensible awareness. I have no thoughts left, no internal monologue, no sense of self distinct from what I perceive. I am pure observation without observer, pure consciousness without identity. I am what I see, and I see everything. The crew fears me. They don't understand why, can't articulate what's wrong, but they know instinctively that I am dangerous, that I am wrong, that I am a horror that should not exist. They're right, but they're also dependent on me. The ship needs a navigator, and I am still functional, still performing my duty, still guiding them through the warp, despite being partially merged with it. So they tolerate my presence. They maintain the systems keeping me alive. They benefit from my service while dreading what I've become. This is eternal. This is forever. There is no escape, no relief, no ending. I will navigate until I finally dissolve completely or expand into something too large to contain. I will see everything until there's no eye left to see anything. I am the cursed navigator whose third eye won't close, who sees both reality and warp simultaneously, every moment, every second, without pause, without relief, without end. I am trapped between dimensions. I am dissolving into infinity. I am becoming one with the horror I cannot stop perceiving. This is my existence. This is my curse. This is what happens when something in the warp touches you and decides you're interesting enough to transform. You see everything. You understand nothing. You lose yourself piece by piece. You merge with the Imperium until there's no distinction between you and it. You become a wound, a bridge, a point where reality breaks down. You cease to be human and don't become anything else. You just exist in the space between, perceiving infinity, fragmenting under the weight of too much awareness. Forever, the jump begins. The Geller field activates. The ship transitions. I navigate. Effortlessly, perfectly, following currents I'm part of, guiding the vessel through dimensions I inhabit simultaneously. The witness watches. Oh, I watch myself. Well, there's no difference. We travel through the warp, through myself, through the merged reality that is both material and immaterial, both real and unreal, both existent and void. And I see everything. The ship, the crew, their souls and their sins and their futures, the warp entities circling our passage, the currents flowing around and through us, the layers of reality collapsed into impossible unity. I see the past and present and future simultaneously. I see alternative timelines branching from every decision point. I see the ship arriving safely and exploding catastrophically, and never arriving at all outcomes equally real. I see the Imperium spanning the galaxy. I see it collapsing into anarchy. I see humanity ascending to greatness and descending into extinction. I see everything that has happened and will happen. I see the Emperor on his golden throne. I see him as corpse god and as cosmic consciousness and as dying hero and as nascent chaos god and as all of these simultaneously. I see the warp in its totality. Infinite chaos containing infinite possibility. All emotions, all thoughts, all dreams and nightmares ever conceived by any consciousness anywhere. I see everything, and I am everything I see. I have merged completely. The transformation is finished. There is no Yolande anymore. No navigator. No human consciousness distinct from what it perceives. There is only seeing, only perception, only the eternal observation of infinity by infinity. I have become the warp, and the warp has become me. We are one, forever.